Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Miriam Meckel. I'm a professor for communication science at this university, and I was spontaneously assigned to this session to improve the gender balance of this whole symposium. Apart from that, we're going to be talking about the issue that we are assigned to in the program, which is detecting risks as a managerial duty. And I'd like to start with a quote by Winston Churchill, who is famous for being very impolite, especially to women at dinner tables. But this time I have a very serious quote from him, which goes, "When people stumble upon the truth, they usually pick themselves up and hurry about their business." If we think of this quote, it could be a description of our current situation of the financial and the euro crisis. It assumably is not, because Winston Churchill has been dead for more than 40 years, as we all know. But he seems to have been a good interpreter of signals of weakness in humankind that produce risks. And that's what we're going to talk about today, especially looking at managers coping with all the different kinds of signals, strong signals, but also weak signals, to identify future risks for their business. We as human beings often rather ignore the truth and hints that might lead us to risks, and we rather move along our regular tracks instead of making the best out of the first signs that pop up that we can approach to introduce change and transformation in favor of preventing a problem from turning into a crisis. So how is that? How we can better detect risks as weak signals and learn from them and improve our businesses. How can management today cope with these tasks? And that's what we want to discuss this afternoon with two distinguished business leaders. The first one on my right side, on your left side, is Rajiv Bajaj, since April 2005, Managing Director of Bajaj Auto Limited, India's leading two-wheeler manufacturer. Very warm welcome to you. And the second guest this afternoon, yeah, please, go ahead. The second guest this afternoon is Paul Taylor, President and CEO of Fitch Group, one of the three most prominent rating agencies in the world. Mr. Taylor has taken over as CEO and President in April this year. So, Paul, you're kind of in the period of grace that is about to last like 100 days in Europe. So, if you want to end it today by some provocative statements, we very much encourage you to do so. And I'm happy to hear about your first experiences in managing risks and detecting risks in this position. Starting with Rajiv. Both panelists have the chance to introduce their view on our topic today in a few minutes, and then we get into a discussion and open up to your questions in the audience later on. Please, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you. Very nice to be here. I'm going to restrict my comments actually to my interpretation of the title of this session, which is Detecting Risks as a Managerial Duty. I'd like to dwell on three words. The first word is detection. In my experience of 21 years working at Bajaj, I've come to believe now that it should not be necessary, at least not all the time, to detect risk. It should be more self-evident, it should be more self-obvious, so that we can then go about our task of actually preventing things from going wrong. If we had to put in a lot of effort to merely detect something, where would be the time to then go and fix it? So that's one. The second is the word manager. I'd like to share with you my interpretation of the word manager. I'm a manager and I see myself as somebody that works in a system, as opposed to someone else who might work on the system. I can tell you, I don't go to Davos because there's lots of people there who work on the system. I come to a university because I prefer to work in the system. So from an in the system point of view, I tell you a short story that is very famous in India. It's a story about 5 people who were lost in the forest in West Bengal, and they came across a tiger, a Bengal tiger. And while 4 people sought to run, one fellow calmly sat down and tried to put on his shoes. And everybody looked at him with this incredulous look saying, "Do you think putting on shoes is going to help you outrun the tiger?" And he said, "No, all I need to do is outrun the 4 of you." So from my perspective as a manager, I care less, or I am less concerned about what's happening on the system. What concerns me most is that within the system, I've got shoes that's better than my competitions, and that can keep me ahead. The third one is the word risk, of course, and I understand that this symposium is about risk as its focal point. And as a manager of a business, I've come to a conclusion that often the most inimical thing or the most risky thing for a manager of business is business management itself or management science itself. Because in my last 21 years that I've been working, I started as an engineer with ideas like Kaizen, just-in-time, Toyota production, CAD/CAM, robotics, automation. Then I moved on to TQM, Six Sigma, Blue Oceans, 7 Habits, re-engineering, restructuring, the bottom of the pyramid, so on and so forth. What I found at the end of 21 years is that business schools and business professors and business books, to keep themselves on the seminar circuit or to keep themselves on the shelf, have a new business theory every 6 months. And this keeps us as perpetual students throughout our careers. So sometimes I think this proliferation of management science or management wisdom is sometimes the greatest risk in running businesses, because CEOs like us will go out to conferences like this, pick up yet another new idea, come back and try and push it through the organization. That's very inimical to organizations sometimes. So I restrict my comments just to these 3 words out of the title, and then I hope we have a nice discussion.
Thank you very much. Paul, your turn.
Thank you. I've already learned a couple of things about risk just listening to the opening remarks, so thank you. So it was interesting also that I was introduced as a new CEO of Fitch, and that I'm in my grace or my honeymoon period. Let me tell you, for a rating agency, that lasts 5 minutes. So forget about 100 days. So I guess this idea of managing risk within the business is a particularly interesting one for me, because I can approach it from 2 different angles. So as a manager of the business, as the person responsible for the commercial aspects of our company, for the quality of product, etc., there are a number of things that I need to look at to be able to mitigate risk. I'd also stress it's not negate risk, because I think you need a degree of risk in a business, because that's how you grow and develop, or how you can grow and develop the business. So there are the normal day-to-day things. We have, what's our acquisition strategy? Does something fit? Does it make sense? Do we want to be proactive, reactive? You can look at technological change. Do we move our products onto a platform that deals with mobile devices and tablet devices? And there are the things like staff, maintaining an appropriate staff level with appropriate skills to deliver the products that we need to deliver. So there's the normal day-to-day stuff, which the list can go on and on. There's regulation, there's litigation, there's communication, taxation. You can go through a long list of day-to-day risks that you need to think about and look at. There are also things that are shifts in the curve. I tend to view them as longer-term changes to how a market operates. So in my own field, that could include the development of modeling techniques to replace or take over from fundamental analysis that we do. It could be the move to data aggregators such as Bloomberg, Thomson Reuters, new players coming into the market. So we have the day-to-day, but also the longer term. And I guess you heard yesterday about the idea of peripheral vision and trying to keep an eye out for new things that are developing. But I could also approach this question from the aspect of a rating agent, where the product we have, the product of a rating agency, is to assess risk and to opine upon risk. And there we have the risks to the business are very much that we don't do a very good job. We don't deliver a particularly good product. So to the extent we don't do a good job of identifying risk within markets, with companies, with banks, with sovereign states, structured finance transactions, If we don't do a good job there, clearly our business suffers. And we've had very good examples of that through the financial crisis, which we spent many years trying to resolve the issues coming out there. So I think it's important as well within the product mix we have that risk can rear its head very quickly to the extent we just don't deliver a strong enough product. And maybe one comment I'd make on those lines, the most important thing I think we've done as a company coming out of the financial crisis, or as the crisis has developed, I think we're still very much in the middle of it, we put together a team of people that sit above the day-to-day operations. We put a team of people, there's about 40 people, 40 senior analytical staff, and their job is to think bigger picture, is to think macro. It's to think about the developing trends, situations in markets, within economies, and really to feed that information back to the analytical teams who are on the front line doing the micro analysis. So it's important that we deliver a good product. We're an important component in financial markets. We understand that, we know that. The best thing we can do is deliver the best product we have, and most of the risk mitigation in the product is by just doing our best earnest efforts to be as open, transparent, and clear as we can be in the rationale to our products. So I'll leave it at that, and I think the best part of these sessions is the interaction, so let's get quickly to the interaction.
Thanks so much, Paul. I'd like to pick up one example you gave, as a reaction to the financial crisis. You said you set up a team really looking into the things differently to get the broader picture of the whole thing. Excuse me to be so frank about it, but what did you do before the financial crisis? No broad picture at all?
No. So not quite as straightforward as that, as most things are. So before the financial crisis, we had individual teams of analysts, and these teams could be several hundred people large. And it was really left to the teams to be thinking about the bigger picture. So it was left to the teams to decide what are the trends emerging, what are the big pictures emerging, what does it mean? And I think the trick we missed there was that you quickly, particularly the senior staff, quickly get sucked into the details of a particular transaction, a particular company, and they're not spending enough time stepping back to think about the bigger picture, the bigger trends. And they also don't necessarily have access to the right information to be able to make an informed decision. So by pulling together a centralized team, we put a more dedicated resource in place, but we gave them the ability to access the information, to have access across the whole company to what's going on in different parts of the company, so that they were just better informed and therefore better able to come up with their assessments. And then as important as that was that they then act as a catalyst to pass those messages back to the individual teams to make those teams then think about it. So we're forcing the process of communicating within the company to work better than it was working previously. So it wasn't as though we were doing nothing. We just, I think, found a much better system. Ask me in 10 years' time and I'll tell you if it's better or not. But I think we found a better system to be aware of the developing risks that we see in markets.
That's somehow about access to information. It's also about information flow within the company to really get all the details, all the information you need to set up a broader picture. Could we go as far as to say something like your basic idea of risk management was really challenged by this financial crisis? Because I just found, for example, just one example, I found the quote by the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission of the US. They said in their report that the three rating agencies, Fitch and Moody's and Standard & Poor's, were the key enablers of the worst financial crisis. As a key enabler of a really bad crisis, a company that is encouraged to detect and evaluate risks, that's kind of a huge problem. What kind of debate, of discussion did you have about the risk management after that?
So our whole company is about risk assessment. That's what we do. That's what we do day in, day out. We have around about 1,200 analytical staff whose job it is to assess, identify, quantify risk. So they were doing that before the financial crisis, the same way that, in many ways, the same way they're doing it now. So unfortunately, in the aftermath of and we keep talking about the crisis, I think we're still in the crisis. So this started in mid-2007. We're seeing different phases of it. So the world's not in a happy, clear place at the moment. Let's be clear on that. So leading up to the crisis, the message coming out of the crisis, particularly at the political policy-making level, which is then passed out more widely through the media, has become far too simplistic. So we certainly are one of the parties that share blame in terms of what happened in financial markets. So I'd never deny that or try and shy away from that. But I think key enabler is a little bit too strong, and I think it simplifies too much what was going on. And I'll give you a very specific example, if I can, to try and illustrate what the sort of thinking that was going on. So the epicenter of the financial market crisis was the US residential mortgage market. So this is where banks and others were packaging individual mortgages, turning them into securities, often of several $1 billion, and then selling those securities to third-party investors. And we were a key part of that process because we were stamping these things with high-quality credit ratings. Now, the analysis that went into us giving that stamp was actually pretty robust. So the analysis itself is not rocket science. You need to think about how many of the loans are going to go bad, and if they go bad, how much would you lose on those loans? So that includes the decline in value of the property, it includes the interest costs that would build up, it includes other costs. So the analysis itself is not that complicated. So before the crisis, we had levels in the US market was broken down into 3 tiers. Prime mortgages, they're called Alt-A and subprime. And subprime is often the one that leads the media headlines. So before the financial crisis, mortgage losses in the US, historically, the peak levels have been around 1%. So that's the worst we'd ever seen in that market over a 50-year data period. The level of enhancement going on mortgage transactions in the US in 2004, 2005, for a prime transaction, the best quality mortgages, was around about 3 to 4%. Okay, so several multiples on historic. And for subprime assets, the lower quality assets, the level of credit enhancement to get to AAA was around about 20%. So we knew there was a difference between asset quality. Now, in 2004, Fitch actually put a report out that said we have concerns about the US housing market. We think it's overheating. We think there's some signs that things are starting to deteriorate. And actually, we changed our criteria. We changed the assessment of how many go bad, how much you lose. So for subprime mortgages, our numbers on average went from around 20% to maybe 23, 24%. So we increased the level of cover you needed. Now, in hindsight, given everything that's happened and what we now know, we would have needed to move our number to 50% to have been correct. So we managed to spot the direction. We completely missed the magnitude of what was going on. And I'm not going to go into the whole details of why that was. But I think it's important to understand that we weren't blindly stamping these things and doing no work. We just had flawed analysis. The analysis itself wasn't good enough. It didn't identify the developing problems within that market.
That might be a good way of approaching the question of detecting risks from a divergence between financial-driven analysis and data-driven analysis on the one hand side, and on more turning to intuition maybe. I don't know if you can relate to the term intuition, but I thought from your introductory remarks I could feel something like not a new business concept every 6 months, taught by business schools, and make business leaders get turned away from their focus in a way. And the second thing was that you said, if we spend so much time on analyzing and trying to detect risk, where's the time to really deal with the risks? So is this something that might be put into a broader concept of intuition and trying to approach the challenges by a more holistic view?
No, I would not like to support the notion that it should be intuitive, because when one runs a corporation, it is very difficult to implement an intuition. It is easier to implement something that is logical or scientific. So I would say this, and we did a session on this yesterday, that in a way, corporate wellness, running a healthy corporation, one that is risk-free or relatively risk-free, is not very different from one's own personal wellness. We are all at risk in a certain sense, because we can fall ill because of the environment around us, the pollution, the food we eat, etc. So potentially we are all at risk to fall sick. But the reality is that there is a concept called susceptibility. Unless a person is inherently susceptible to something, the person will not take ill on account of that. That is why we don't all fall sick simultaneously to the same bacteria or to the same microbe. I think this is true of companies as well, because even through the crisis, which affected even India in 2008, while many companies took ill and suffered from not having dealt with risk adequately, perhaps in terms of flawed analysis, etc. But the reality also is that there were companies across sectors. I know for sure in the Indian industry, whether it was automobiles, engineering, IT, pharma, there were some companies across all sectors that did not fall sick, that did not suffer from the damage, at least relatively, that all others were. So we can say that these companies, by virtue of something which I would like to believe, or I would like to call as their strategy, they had a strategy in place which made them not susceptible to what was going wrong in the world outside them, or made them less susceptible. They had more immunity from within.
What do you think it was that made them less susceptible and made them somehow immune to what was happening in the outer world?
I would put it like this, that in my view, as I was discussing with briefly with Professor Day earlier today, I think successful companies or successful entrepreneurs are usually ones who start by making one product for one market or one customer. And they get very good at doing that. But after some time, somewhere, we forget that we are successful because we had that focus, as Professor Day called it. We think we are successful because we are smart. And we can make lots of things for lots of markets. And in the process, what we do is we dilute our focus and we commoditize our businesses. I say this because in India, for example, an emerging market with a huge marketplace of over 1 billion people, still growing at 7% a year, all the boats rise with the high tide. I mean, an entrepreneur in India can do so many things simultaneously, and he would still do well for the next 5, 10, or 20 years. But we must understand that one day our markets will mature when they have evolved sufficiently, like your markets have. And at that time, it will be important to specialize. I mean, to me, in one word, the interpretation of strategy is simply specialization. Today, a doctor specializes, a sportsman specializes, an artist specializes, but managers don't feel the need to specialize, or companies don't feel the need to specialize. So the short answer to your question would be that I perceive the greatest risk to companies like ours is the risk of commoditization, because unfortunately, management does not teach us. It only teaches us techniques for growth, but it does not teach us how to draw a line between growth and greed. And when we cannot draw the line and we cross the boundary from growth to greed, I think we commoditize our business, we make it susceptible, so that the slightest problem in the outside world proves inimical to us after that.
Can we just take a moment to your company, because you had some problems as well in 2009. Phelps India wrote in that year, Bajaj Auto was down in the dumps, and then you did something what I find very courageous. You really reinvented the company, turning away from the very popular scooter, turning towards more elaborate models of two-wheelers, motorcycles. If you think of this period, what was the biggest risk you were thinking of? Was there something like waking up at night and really thinking, whoa, that's a point of no return?
Well, I would put it like this, just for everybody's knowledge. For 30 years, through the 60s till the 90s, Bajaj Auto was the fastest growing company in India in the private sector. We made scooters, and if you wished to purchase a Bajaj scooter, when my father was running the company, you had to book it 10 years before you actually wanted it. That was the waiting period for the scooter. So this is one scenario and one mindset with which to run a company. When I joined the company December 1990, you had to still wait for 18 months to buy your favorite scooter. Today I have 18 weeks of stock waiting to be sold. So the situation has changed completely. I would say, to answer your question in terms of the risk, for a long time, we worked under the assumption, the implicit assumption, that more is more. As I was saying earlier, if we do more things, if we have more people, more resources, we make more products, go to more markets, we will achieve more. What we understood is that more is more does not work. What works is less is more. So we decided to specialize at a time when we went quickly from being on top of the heap. In 10 years' time, from 1990 to 1999, we found ourselves at the bottom of the barrel. A company that could do no wrong was suddenly losing money in its business. So in 10 years, the bottom fell out of our world, and we had to completely kind of redo the company. And at the heart of it was the philosophy that less is more. Let's do one thing right. We decided to stop all other product lines, all plants. We got rid of 2/3 of our people. We focused on only one segment of the market, motorcycles. And with this philosophy of less is more, we have kind of come back. We are now the 3rd largest motorcycle maker in the world, with 4 very strong brands. And we are, for the last 3 years, with a operating margin of 20%, the most profitable automotive company in the world. And sometimes when I'm asked, why is this so, what is it we have done? I like to say it is not what we have done, but it is what we have not done. Because what we have not done brings all kinds of risk to the business in terms of product development, in terms of marketing costs, in terms of quality problems. Doing one thing well, having a strategy that is an inch wide but a mile deep, is what has worked for us.
What you didn't answer is a question, any nightmares during the period of reinventing?
Yes, well, I don't know if it was a nightmare, but it's always 2 sides of the coin. In a way, by putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak, by saying to ourselves, we are going to go after one segment in the market and try to dominate the world in that segment. This is considered a very big risk. In terms of management jargon, one of the words we often use is de-risking. But unfortunately, management jargon doesn't teach us where de-risking ends and defocusing begins. Because under the garb of de-risking, we can end up defocusing the company. So the biggest risk we took is to just do one thing. But we took that risk because we thought that was less risky than trying to do too many things at the same time, especially when our market had opened up and global competition from Japan, from Europe to USA was there. So the biggest risk we took is to do one thing well. But I think in the end, that is not a risk. That is the real way to de-risk the business. It may be contra-intuitive. So contra-intuitiveness is better than intuition.
Okay. I'd like to stay with your statement, less is more. Paul, can you relate to that, less is more, as risk prevention strategy?
Less is more. It's such a wide-ranging topic that you can find examples where you take on more risk and it works, you reduce risk and it works. So I think it has to be situation-specific when you talk about how you manage risk, how you handle risk. I'll give the example of my own company. So Fitch is really a fairly new company. Whilst the origination of our business goes back to 1913, in fact, the company as it currently exists was only really created in 2000, when a French entrepreneur decided he liked the ratings business, and he took on a tremendous risk by leveraging himself up to buy the entire middle tier of the industry. So we have an industry dominated by 2 American players in S&P and Moody's. And then during the course of 3 years, this French entrepreneur put together the 4 next ranking rating agencies to form what has become Fitch. So he took on a tremendous risk at a time where there was a degree of uncertainty about financial markets. We'd just seen the crisis in Korea. We had the crisis in Russia. As I said at the session this morning, there's always a crisis somewhere, so there'll be another one coming along soon, I'm sure. But he took a risk to put these businesses together. And it's an investment and a risk that has paid him handsomely, has worked out very well for him in a commercial sense. So maybe that's an example of not less is more, but actually more is more. So I think it depends on the situation, the circumstances, and the specifics of the business that you're looking to run or to improve.
So I'd like to take the chance to move the focus a little bit from general debating, detecting risk, what kind of risk and how to deal with them, to very specific ways of detecting risk moments in business. And Rajiv was talking about the fact that sometimes we, customization, you named it. Kunaidu in the session before us talked about we're in the permanent state of denial towards what's happening to our planet in terms of ecological problems. Isn't it true for several other fields of business, like the financial industry, that there is sort of a self-centered perception that somehow leads to the idea of don't adjust your mind, it's reality that's malfunctioning?
Financial markets are innovative by nature, I think. So I know, I think it was Paul Volcker was saying the best financial innovation in the last 50 years has been the ATM, the cash machines. I don't actually agree with that. I think there's been a lot more beneficial innovation in financial markets that's led to a general growth in well-being in many, many countries and markets. So I think we're a little bit harsh on the financial business, of which we play a part on the sidelines. We're a financial information company. We don't lend money, we don't invest money, and we're just really opining upon what's going on in those markets. So I think this idea of constantly moving financial markets, it's not a bad one. It's bad when it gets ahead of itself. So we clearly saw that in the middle of the last decade, when financial market innovation just got out of control, and there wasn't a control mechanism in place that was sufficiently robust. So that includes regulators, rating agencies, bank internal risk management systems, investor risk management boards. It just wasn't up to the task of identifying and stopping this mushrooming of innovation and risk that was taken on. But I think having a financial market system that is looking to be innovative, is looking to test new things, is actually not an unhealthy thing to have. You need the control system around it. I believe that increasingly we now have that system around it, given the lessons that we've been through, the lessons of the initial stages of this crisis, where it's clear to everybody that things had to change.
Do I understand you correctly that you say that the self-perception of the financial industry has changed? There have been learnings and things are different now from how they were like in 2007?
I think so. So I'm sure there are pockets within financial markets where nothing has changed. I'm sure that's the case. And in fact, many pockets of financial markets have performed fine during the crisis as we talk about it. But there's no question in my mind that when you sit down opposite senior bank management or senior investors, their thinking has changed. Of course it's changed. None of us want to go through the few years we've just had. Just from a purely personal level, I'd sooner be on the front foot, not on the back foot. So I'm more than convinced that across the board, management attitudes to risk and how you control risk, how you assess risk, has changed quite dramatically in the last few years.
Where do you draw the line between risk-taking and gambling?
So I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask that question, since for any of you who know rating agencies and how they operate, we're inherently conservative. So gambling doesn't really figure in how we think.
No, but you have observations of financial markets, of company strategies, of whatever. You're collecting all these information, and you probably have to base your ratings on the idea of whether this is really truly a fundamental strategy that's reliable, or whether this is some kind of gambling which won't turn out to be good in future.
Maybe there's a slightly different way of thinking about that question, which is, so we opine on the risk we see in a particular situation. And if we think it's a very remote risk, we give it a high grading. We have the AAA scale down to CCC scale. If we think it's a very high risk, we give it a low rating. So we're not really saying which level on the scale is the best one to have. And in fact, for many investors, they're quite happy to invest in very high risk assets because the return they get compensates them for the increase in risk. So our job is to opine on where we think the risk is. Is it up here? Is it down here? The investor's job is to decide where does he want to be on that scale. And actually for management as well in companies, having a high rating isn't necessarily the best thing to do. You may not be returning or giving the best return to your shareholders by having the most conservative approach to business, which tends to give you a higher credit rating.
Mm-hmm. if we think of the center periphery problem we were discussing before, do you observe a difference in risk management, for example, in your country, India, or in Europe, in the US, in other parts of Asia? Any cultural differences?
I have not had occasion to observe so, in the sense that our company has a long partnership with Kawasaki of Japan for the last 30 years. And we are actually the largest shareholder in a Austrian motorcycle company called KTM. Bajaj is a 47% shareholder of KTM. So we have a long experience of working with companies both in Japan and in Europe. And I would say that the good principles or the mistakes are quite universal in their nature. I would explain like this, that what we have learned, for example, from our association with Kawasaki, is how to run the back end of our business in terms of R&D, development, manufacturing. There are risks in all of that, and how does one look at that? Because the discipline, the meticulousness, the attention to detail is tremendous. This is what we learned from the East, so to speak. From the West, what we learned from our partners at KTM is the power of marketing, positioning, pricing, strategy, differentiation, the front end of the business. So in a way, we are in a happy middle space where we learn some things from the East and some things from the West. I don't think we want to learn the back end from the West and the front end from the East. And I say this with all respect, in the sense that, again, I would say, as a person that works in the system, I prefer not to think that first there is a problem with the economy and then many companies suffer as a result. I prefer to think that more often it happens the other way. Companies commoditize their businesses, they don't make money. We have so many companies in India, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, large corporations, but very thin margins. I think if companies commoditize businesses and do badly, companies get into trouble. If companies get into trouble, their banks get into trouble. If the banks get into trouble, the economy gets into trouble. If economies get into trouble, the government gets into trouble. So I prefer to look at it bottom up. I think if all companies were healthy, the economy would automatically be healthy, because hopefully our politicians are reasonably smart and do not cause problems just by themselves.
That's a very, very interesting point, I guess. The applause shows it. That means, if I get you right, that risk management as a managerial duty is not just a task that is focused on the respective business, the company the manager is leading, but it's also like an economical challenge, because you contribute, by good risk management, you also contribute to the development of the national economy or even regional world economies?
Sure, I mean, I would hope so, in a humble way. For example, we are a motorcycle company that sells 4 million motorcycles every year, half of which we sell in India. And as you can imagine, that creates a lot of opportunity for these motorcycles to be serviced afterwards. So we start a program where if you were to come to India, you would see lots of children on our streets when they should actually be in schools. So we pick them up from the street, so to speak, and we try to empower them with some resources and with some skills and knowledge. And we teach them how to service the motorcycle, because we know that practically they can't give up earning and go back to school, but we can kind of help them to leapfrog the process, embed some skills in them, and help them to earn a decent life rather than to live off the street. So I would say, again, in terms of strategy, any such initiative must be centered. There is an argument for peripheral vision, but equally I would say there is an argument for having a very central vision, because ultimately, whether it's in human beings, in organizations, or in countries, problems don't start from the periphery, the problem always starts from the center. It is first the center which is destabilized, and then it is the ripple effect which goes to the periphery. So if we keep these strategies strong in the center, from that center, we can do everything, whether it's a new product or whether it's a CSR activity, whether it's a cost reduction initiative. Everything, if it is centered, it remains very stable and relatively risk-free. This is what I feel.
Yeah. the approach you were talking about, involving people and empowering them to deal with the motorcycles, to attend to the motorcycles, is in a way it's something like an analog crowdsourcing. Yeah, you use people, customers, whoever to really get engaged, get involved with your company. That brings me to another question I'd like to put out here. Maybe first to Paul. If we think of the fact that we're talking about big data, we are talking about crowdsourcing, about collaborating on the internet, we're talking about open innovation, which might be an interesting topic for your field, motorcycles. And we still have a market with 3 global leading rating agencies. Isn't it somehow that you're sort of the oligopoly dinosaurs of the analog age?
I don't feel like a dinosaur.
No, you don't look like.
No, I don't look like one. No, I don't. So this whole the debate about information. So that there's, with the revolutionary age we're going through at the moment in terms of technology and technological development. I don't know how many of you get a train to work, but if you sit on a train and look at how many people are playing with electronic devices as opposed to reading the newspaper, the change is quite amazing. What's going on in the world? So there is almost a data overload at the moment for key decision makers. And I think that's actually one of the most crucial things facing us as a company. So forget about the products we deliver and ratings, actually us as a business, because at the heart we're a publishing business, we publish research, we publish information and data. So actually one of the most important subjects for us at the moment is how do we convert from being a fairly traditional website, printed, well, we went from printed to website. I think we're now moving on to mobile applications and the ability to manipulate data. So that, because I'm sort of wandering from the 3 rating agency subject, but it's relevant. The rating agency is simply one source of information about risks that's coming into the key decision makers at investors. So our client base, our customers, are basically risk takers and investors. They're overloaded with data at the moment, and I think the cry we hear from them is, give me something that's quickly digestible, that I can manipulate it if I need to, I can put my own assumptions into the work you've done, but give me something I can use. Don't just throw reams of data, reams of paper at me. So that's something we're wrestling with at the moment. I view it as a real sea change in not just financial markets, but actually the world at large. Is the amount of data available now is just so huge. And the ability to absorb that data, work out what parts are relevant to you and how you use it, is really a key management challenge for anybody in a general management role.
Do you internally use methods, procedures of crowdsourcing, crowd wisdom to
Yes.
embellish? Yeah, you do. Can you give us an example?
We absorb all kinds of information. So I'll give you an example of, so a corporate credit rating analyst at Fitch will be covering on average eight companies. So he spends his year following 8 individual companies, normally in 1 or 2 sectors. He does other bits and pieces, but that's his key role. So he'll be absorbing information on those companies. And he'll absorb information from any source he can find it. And it's really the skill in the job is working out which ones you're interested in, which ones you think have value, how you interpret and add your own opinions and decision to it. So in any particular point in time, you can go out into the information sphere, if that's a word, and you can find a variety of opinions, complete extremes of a spectrum. So you can have people that think the Eurozone is going to collapse and fall apart and it's going to be a disaster and end in social unrest and civil strife. And you'll find equally well-informed, intelligent, rational people saying that actually we think it'll fly ahead quite happily, it'll resolve itself and things will be fine. And there's a whole range between that. Mm-hmm. So the challenge we have as a business is credibly having a position that you can argue your case. Whether people accept the case or not is down to them. It's always down to individual choice and the individual to make their own decision. So it's how do you eloquently make your argument in a format that they can quickly and easily understand and see. Mm-hmm. But we absorb any kind of information.
Mm-hmm. Rajiv, do you have procedures in place to integrate, for example, the customer in innovation processes, in detecting flaws, failures of products to prevent the risk of, for example, having to withdraw a product or having to call back a series of motorcycle, whatever?
See, I would say this, that in terms of going to new product segments or new markets, there is a creative process and there is a reactive process. Mm-hmm. My experience is that it is very useful to involve the consumer in a reactive process. But it is almost pointless to do so in a creative process, because if the consumer were able to participate in that, then he should be doing our job really. So I think the creative process is an inside-out process. And I don't mean that in any arrogant sense. What I mean is simply this, that a lot of my management understanding comes from the science of homeopathy. And a great homeopath said that what makes us who we are is not what we have in common with others, it is what we have in uncommon with others. It's the same thing about companies. A company has a position, or a USP as they call it, not because of what it has in common with other companies, but what differentiates it from other companies. If it has a point of differentiation, an attribute on which it is seen to be unique, we give that a name and we call it a brand. So what we say to ourselves in our approach to management is that it is very difficult in this complex world for any one person or 10 people to be wise enough to lead an entire corporation. And it is very difficult beyond a point for one human being to have so much implicit trust and faith in another. What is more enduring, I think, is the logic of the brand. Once a company has a strong brand that stands for something, instead of having any notion of a top-down or a bottom-up management, we were always taught, the West is top-down, East is bottom-up, so on and so forth. We say to ourselves that perhaps there is a third way of managing all information, taking it in and making sense of it, like a center-out way. Put the brand at the center of it, what it stands for, what its identity is, and let all activities and all actions of the company be derived from that. So whether you're, in our context, as a consumer durable maker, whether you're a motorcycle maker, whether you're Apple, whether you're BMW, whether Nokia, whatever it is, you should hope to stand for something and place that something in the middle of the discussion. Then it becomes very evident and obvious as to what is good for you and what might not be good or what might be risky for you. We have found that a useful way to make things more obvious or more self-evident.
So I'd like to open up to questions from the audience so that you can engage in the discussions. And I see a lot of hands already raising. One over there to the right-hand side. I think you were the first one. If you could shortly introduce yourself and say your name.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Françoise Thomas from Luxembourg. My question is for Mr. Taylor, and now please don't you take it personal, but you happen to be here and not your competitors. And actually the question is not biased, it's really a genuine question. Do you think that rating agencies are the solution or the risk? Because actually, before the crisis, you rated products which led right into the crisis, AAA, and you kept on doing so for quite a time, and it was exactly those types of products that caused part of the crisis, not everything of it, I'm not saying that, but part of it. And now today, you are claiming to rate governments and companies after the crisis or still in the crisis, thereby really labeling these companies and governments as good or bad, and thereby trying to mitigate risk. But my question is, do you not really create risk instead of mitigating risk? And for those who attended Mr. Thomas Sedlacek's seminar this morning, there was a very interesting statement that if you pretend to create certainty in a period of fundamental uncertainty, you create even greater risk. So what's your assessment of that type of criticism? Thank you.
So, very good question, to which I'll try and answer. So we'll be judged as a company, as an industry, over a period of time based upon published data on how our ratings perform. So we publish, every year we publish ratings, default and transition data. So it covers all of the thousands of ratings we have, companies, banks, insurance companies, sovereigns, structured finance. And we're always going to come back to the crisis and the role of mortgage-backed securities and certain other transactions that failed to perform during that crisis, and where ratings clearly failed to be a good predictor of performance. So if you look at our published ratings transition data, you'll see that actually the majority of what we've done over that period has been actually quite robust. So I always come across as really defensive when I come out with this line, but there's not really any way of I can't avoid it. I have to tell you the full picture. So certain areas perform very badly, and we've had to look very hard at ourselves to make sure we fix the problems that we saw there, or at least make every effort to fix the issues we saw. But there are many other areas of the business where we actually have done pretty well as an indicator of relative credit risk. Now, the second part to the question, which is probably more interesting, is in the field of sovereign ratings, where there's so much publicity, so much noise at the moment, so much attached to the actions of rating agencies that, surely we're part of the problem. We're not this on the sideline, just giving an opinion party. So that's a much more difficult one to deal with. So I don't want to be the center of attention in sovereign credit markets. We certainly didn't create the problems in sovereign debt markets. I mean, it goes back, if you look at the fundamental economic situation of many markets, you can see where the issues have come from. Countries have lived beyond their means for a long time. So there's fundamental issues there which are nothing to do with ratings and rating agencies. So the challenge we have is how do we give our honest opinion about the relative ranking, the relative creditworthiness of a country, whilst at the same time trying to avoid the idea that we're exacerbating the problem, we're adding to the problem. So we're still wrestling with that one is the honest answer. We've made some changes. We release any rating actions on a Friday evening, for example. We try and avoid market impact. We're actually talking about not creating press releases when we take rating actions. So that would be a pretty big change for us. We're trying to move away from the media storm that sometimes comes. And then also we've been having many discussions at an individual government level where we've been trying our hardest to convince governments to stop talking about ratings. So, I can't understand why a government would start talking about the desire to maintain a AAA rating or, it's important we keep our rating because one, they have no control over it. And secondly, it's quite clear if you understood the analysis that they're under pressure. Now, I'd also caveat what I'm saying by the fact that we're now talking about Europe. We're talking about the Eurozone. So we're talking about 17 of the 110 sovereign ratings we have. And it's only in Europe, in this, the center of where the crisis is at the moment, that we're having these kinds of discussions. So hopefully it half answers the question.
Isn't it a little bit naive to think that the media attention and the public attention can be reduced, will go away? If you think of Standard & Poor's down rating the sovereign debt of the US in 2011, I mean, there is something like symbolic significance in such an act, and that's producing significance or maybe even risk.
Yeah, it is. And of course, it's a big story when the US gets moved down from AAA. I would stress that only one rating agency has moved the US. We rate the US as AAA, but of course you don't read that in the newspapers. So I'd encourage you to interpret the stuff you're reading. And the people we're most concerned about, so our customers, the people we're creating the ratings for, the people who pay us to buy the research and data. So they're professional market players. They understand things a bit better than the media headlines. So of course we know there's a tension attached to what we do because we're part of we do have importance in markets, we understand that. But if it brings attention to what's going on in those markets, there's a reason that S&P changed its outlook on the US. So instead of saying, oh, look, the US ratings changed, isn't S&P doing something bad? Why isn't there a discussion about why have they made that change? What's the rationale behind it? Why have we put France on negative outlook? What's the reason behind it? You can then agree or not disagree with our analysis. That's entirely your choice. But at least let's have a discussion about why these countries' credit profiles are under risk, under threat. And I don't think there's any problem with having transparency in markets where you have these discussions. The big issue with the politicians at the moment is they feel a little bit as though we as unelected officials are dictating to them about what they should do. That misunderstands the situation. We're not telling them what to do. We're opining on the fundamentals of an economic system.
Other questions, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Lisa from Germany, and I work on ethics of organizations at this university, and I would like to ask a question to Mr. Bajaj. You say that you want to be in the system and not on top of the system. And I think in a way that's what every manager would want to say. But isn't the interesting question not whether you think you're in the system, but whether your employees think that you are in the system and that they can really give you all the information that you need to really be in the system? Because often for employees it's quite a risk, speaking of risk again, to actually tell the leadership what's going on in the company. So in very concrete terms, in your daily work, what do you do to really be in the system and to make sure your employees know that you are in the system? Thank you.
Yeah. See, obviously in a large and we have 8,000 employees. So in a large company like that, which has many individual functions, there is always a discussion around communication, transparency, and subjects like this. And in our view, this is a puzzle that, in a sense, will never be solved. The best way we have found out of it is simply this, that, as I said earlier, we must all come from the same center that our business is centered on. In our view, a business center is defined by a certain set of skills and the cost structure that accompanies those skills. That is what defines our business. When we grow our business, we don't try to grow it in a manner that is discontinuous from that center. For example, a marketing strategist, Al Ries, said, the job of the CEO is to find the future in the current activities. It is not to find the grass which is greener on the other side and create a discontinuous growth path. But to take what you have in terms of the skills and cost structure you have and ask yourself what else, what more you can do with it. When we compete with 4 distinct brands. I say this because you said, what do we do in concrete terms? At the premium end, we have a brand called KTM out of Austria. At the bottom end, we have a workhorse motorcycle called Boxer that we sell in Africa. And in between, we have 2 value for money brands. One commuting motorcycle and one sports motorcycle. So when we engage with employees across functions and across levels, what we would do is not to discuss things generically in terms of quality improvement or cost reduction or outsourcing or new markets, but we would always talk in the context of a very specific brand. Because the more you specialize the discussion around a specific subject, the more obvious it becomes to everybody what it needs to be said about that subject. And then the discussion becomes very, very productive. So you can take this kind of a discussion completely cross-functionally, because when you speak of a brand is not a functional subject. A brand is a subject that runs across all functions of the organization and all levels. And then we have to find a way in terms of how we manage our people, whether we manage them for the short-term objectives of the company, which every company must, every commercial organization must in terms of its quarterly performance, or in terms of the longer-term development goals of the organization. So it is not only product development or manufacturing or purchasing that is driven by the brand. Even the HR activities in terms of developing the organization, its skills, and the future leadership of the company should be driven by the same center, which is the brand of the organization. So it is not up to, or it should not be up to, a individual basis his competence or his apparent charisma or his longevity in the organization, that it should be a learning and growing organization or a participative organization. It should be by virtue of a logic which is not dependent on any individual or any particular system. In our case, we have found this to be possible by putting our brand at the center of every discussion.
I think one last question, maybe here in front.
Thank you. My name is Alex. I'm from Montreal, Canada. My question is directed at Mr. Taylor. As you correctly pointed out, rating agencies tend to be very conservative. Keeping that in mind, as a CEO of a rating agency, I was wondering what your opinion is about the basically relatively limitless rehypothecation that one can do in Britain through global subsidiaries. We've seen a recent example with MF Global. I mean, rehypothecation has great advantages for increasing liquidity, but given the volatility in the market, is it worth the risk? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite understood the question. Could you...
Okay, so basically right now in many countries, including the US, we have, there's roughly 140% of assets that one can rehypothecate through various methods. Now, in the UK, there's no actual limit. So you can go beyond that by far. And if you happen to have, let's say, MF Global, they were using MF Global UK to transfer their funds, and through basically shadow banking, just increasing their over-leveraging, basically. So given rehypothecation is useful to create liquidity, but given the current volatility in the markets, is it worth the risk, or should there be some sort of temporary regulation maybe or something? Thanks.
So I'm still not sure I completely got the question. If it's about leverage, leverage, shadow banking, those areas, I think there's been a natural correction in markets. There's no question that the system became over-leveraged, and the reason I think we're still in the middle of a crisis, which has probably got at least another 5 years to run, is because there is a deleveraging process going on, which is painful and slow, and will continue to take time. So there is a natural decline going on with leverage. And then in terms of the shadow banking system, I think that's actually one of the biggest challenges for the authorities in terms of how do they identify, control, supervise, assess that sector. It's actually very difficult to define. So it's actually easier for us because we're looking at it on a transaction-by-transaction basis. Although having said that, as I mentioned earlier, we have this macro group. One of the things they're looking at actually is the shift of activity towards shadow banking and whether we perceive any risks that are coming with that. So it's a very current question, which I'm not sure I have the final answer for, because it's sort of in motion at the moment.
I'm sorry that we can't take all the questions, because we have to keep in time, and I would like to close this session by one last question to both guests with the request for a very short, which is a 3-word answer. I would like you to tell us the 3 principles of detecting, defining risks in your personal life. 3 principles of detecting, defining risk for your personal life. And to give you a few seconds to think about it, I'd like to know...
I don't need any seconds to think about it.
Let me just tell the audience that everybody who is going to leave this room right after this session is going to face a huge risk, namely the risk of missing the lecture of Ulrich Beck on World Risk Society. So please feel welcome to stay here and enjoy the next part of the panel. So who's going to start? You didn't want to think about it, so please start, Rajiv.
Yeah, again, I will lean on a very wise homeopath. So this is not my own original thinking, I will be candid. But I found this very useful both in a personal and in a corporate context. This is a homeopath from the US who came to India 35 years ago. He lives in the Himalayas. And selflessly for 35 years, he has dispensed homeopathy and looked after and taken care of thousands of Indians. So we are very grateful to Dr. David Little for that. He said there are only 3 truths. One is change. Of course, we can interpret it as we want, sudden change or evolutionary change, but one is change. The second is relativity. Everything in the world is relative. And the third is interdependence. So I think when we talk of strategy, or when sometimes we are too happy or too disillusioned with our lives, it helps to keep in mind that nothing is permanent, it will change. Everything is relative. And ultimately, it's an interdependent world. So for me, these are the 3 important words.
There were much more words than 3, but 3 very important terms: change, relativity, and interdependence. Thank you. Paul, what are your 3 principles?
Risk in my private life.
Yeah.
My wife decides.
Does it mean the risk turns out to be there when your wife decides, or when you decide instead of your wife?
I'm only allowed 3 words.
Thank you very much. Thank all of you for your attention.